Welcome to the Psychology of Waiting webinar. I'm Bill Thompson, Sales Director of the NEXA Group. NEXA is an Australian company that provides technology solutions to drive superior customer service and enhance key facets of operational efficiencies. Now imagine this. You're sitting beside a bubbling brook, the sun streaming through the leaves of the big gum tree above, perhaps a glass of wine. It's peaceful. A kookaburra laughing in the distance. We could sit there for hours and hours and not want this to end. So why is it that last week my experience of a few short minutes in the check-in queue at Los Angeles Airport was so frustrating? Why was my wait for a checkout at Coles supermarkets this morning so stressful, even though it was probably only seconds? I'm excited to introduce you to our esteemed presenter today, Freya Elliott, Principal at the Customer Experience Company. Freya has over 19 years of experience in the world of design and customer experience across the government and private sector, and is passionate about helping organisations become more customer-centric. Her interest in the impact of waiting on customer satisfaction is both from a personal and work perspective, and what she shares with you today will profoundly change the way you experience waiting in your everyday life and how you can positively impact your own customers. Before I hand you over to Freya, I do need to fill you in on some housekeeping matters. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you via email within 24 hours after this session. We'd love you to ask questions. You can do so using the questions panel on your control center on your screen. If you have any technical issues, you can send us a question too. If you are struggling with audio, we recommend you dial in using the call option in the control center. To avoid keeping you waiting any longer, I'll hand over to Freya so she can share with you her presentation on the psychology of waiting. To start, she would like you to answer a quick poll, which you will see on your screen now. Does your organisation manage physical queues? Freya, over to you.
Okay, so the results are coming up now, Bill. It appears that about 71% of people have physical queues and 18 don't, so which is great. So I think, the topic today is going to cover both physical and non-physical queues, so online and telephone queues. So I think the content should be relevant to everyone. So we might kick off then. I thought I might start a little bit with a personal story, I guess. So my interest in the psychology of waiting was actually not sparked by any lofty ambition to do a great job on behalf of my clients, but actually by this man, my husband. So this man, my husband, is a Gemini, and according to Google, Gemini men are friendly, they're loving, they get along with everyone, they can talk the birds out of the trees, as you can probably tell by the hat, and they're also the life of the party. But unfortunately, I guess, being a Gemini, there's a flip side, and that flip side is that they are typically extremely restless and fidgety. And that, I must say, is an understatement. This man will drive 200 kilometres in the wrong direction to avoid traffic. And this year, he woke the children and I up at 6:30 a.m. On Mother's Day to get to the restaurant so we didn't have to queue for breakfast. So you might laugh at my unfortunate life, but hopefully it gives you some understanding as to why I'm interested in the psychology of waiting. And it also, for me, helps to understand what's going on in his brain when he's actually waiting. But I guess more importantly to why it's important to me, it's why it should be important to you. So what's in it for you? I'm just going to ask you to do a little virtual experiment. If you can close your eyes and remember yesterday. Now go on, do it. Those of you that are online, just close your eyes. I want you to think of how many times you waited for something. It could have been a lift, you could have been caught in traffic, could have been a credit card transaction, or you might have just waited in line like Bill did to be served at a supermarket. Maybe this wait was good, maybe it was bad. Just take a mental note of some of those memorable waiting experiences. So I'm going to bet that there was more than one memorable waiting experience. I'm going to place a bet that there was a minimum of 2. So using the power of maths, if there's 7 billion people in the world, each of which is having 2 waiting experiences, then that is, there you go, at least 14 billion opportunities to make a difference. So the exciting thing, I guess, is because you work for companies that have waiting experiences, you have the opportunity to not just wait in the line, but to actually think about how you go about controlling the line. So really, fundamentally, you have the power to make an enormous difference. So hopefully by the time you log off this webinar today, you'll understand how the psychology of waiting can be applied to different situations to literally improve the lives of billions of people. Ooh, I've gone forward. I need to go back. Sorry, I've just gone forward. I need to go back. Here we go. So I'm just going to start, I guess, to clarify that there are 2 major parts of waiting. So there's the queuing part, which is the mathematical theory part, and then there's the waiting part. So this presentation today is really more about the waiting part rather than the maths part. And David Meister said in his research that your job is not to just pay attention to how long the customer waits in a queue before service begins, but really also how the customer feels while they're waiting. So I'm just going to continue a little bit with David's research. When David did his research back in 1985, he came up with 8 factors of waiting. Unfortunately, in the time that we've got available for this webinar, I'm not going to be able to cover all 8 in detail, but I'm going to cover the first 4 in a bit of detail, as they're the main ones, and then I'm going to quickly come through at the end with numbers 5 to 8. So if you're interested or you want more information at the end, there's an opportunity to ask questions of me, but also I'd really encourage you to look online for David's paper, which will fill you in some case studies that I haven't mentioned in the presentation. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to transfer to the first one, number 1, unoccupied time feeling longer than occupied time. So there's a saying, I always like to think of the sayings that my mother said to me, and the saying that she used to say is that, you know, when you have something to occupy yourself, time goes faster, and it could never be more true. So I'll just give you this case study to illustrate what's going on in your brain. But in the early industrial age, buildings started going up. So if you can think of maybe the Empire State Building would be a great example. And this is when people first started to use elevators. But in those days, elevators were excruciatingly slow. So people were constantly complaining about how long it took them to get to the floor that they were trying to get to. So many elevator companies started to design elevators that were faster. But back in the early industrial age, these were excruciatingly expensive. So one very clever engineer actually reframed the problem slightly differently. So instead of focusing on building a faster elevator, he thought the problem was a little bit different. And that is, he thought that the problem was that people thought that elevators were too slow. So this clever engineer decided to put in place something that would occupy people's time while they're waiting. And he installed a set of mirrors in the elevator. And wouldn't you know it, the feedback was positive from customers on the speed of the new lifts. So I guess the design lesson in this is that when designing waiting experiences, always think about things that are going to occupy people while they're waiting. So I'm going to briefly move on to number 2 now. Unfair waits are longer than equitable rates. So once again, I'll start with a saying that my mother always used to tell me, and that's first come, first served is the fairest way to wait. And she couldn't have been more true. So just think of your recent waiting experience and think about how the queue was actually formed. So was it a single line or was it multiple lines? So the rule is that a single line leading to multiple cashiers feels 3 times faster than multiple lines leading to multiple cashiers. So if I can bring that to life, it's more airline queues are a single line leading to multiple cashiers, whereas a supermarket line is typically multiple lines leading to multiple cashiers. So if you don't believe me, just think of the last time that you walked into a bank or a doctor's surgery and you felt that the person who came in after you was seen before you. So in essence, the design lesson is that you should always design, where possible, one queue to a single service. If there are multiple services, you have multiple queues, you can have multiple queues, but it really has to be clear on what service are for each queue. So if you think about a supermarket, it's very clear that you might have an 8 items or less aisle versus a wait to be seen aisle. So just going to move on to number 3. Uncertain weights are longer than finite weights. So once again, start with a mother saying, a watched pot never boils. Research shows that customers often overestimate their waiting time by up to 23%. So even a simple thing like a clock in a waiting room can actually lead to customers feeling more confident that they haven't been in the queue for that long. So there has been research showed that a clock can help customers' estimates. The lesson also is what you design needs to be relative to the context of the wait. So if you can predict the wait, say like a themed ride, like a Disney ride, you should try to tell people how long that wait's going to be. However, if you can't predict the wait, say think like a doctor's surgery, you should give people their place in the queue. So let them know whereabouts they are in the queue relative to the person next to them. You can see now the introduction of new technology like virtual queuing apps and what they actually do to help you reduce their queuing anxiety. So things like this, these are used for everything from ordering a coffee now to lining up to a Santa queue. And what essentially they do is they show you whereabouts in the queue you are relative to other people, and then they'll give you an indication of how long it is until you'll be seen. So they may send you an SMS to say your appointment, come in, you're likely to be seen within the next 15 minutes. The last one that I'll go into in a little bit detail, number 4, anxiety making the wait seem longer, is a really interesting one. So it's been shown research-wise that once a wait goes for longer than about 3 minutes, then the waiting time in someone's head multiplies with each passing minute. So the reason why is because they're standing in line thinking, have I been forgotten? Am I in the right queue? So there's been some simple studies showing that even just the introduction of something as simple as lavender scent can help reduce people's anxiety. But what I really like, and this one always resonates with me, is I call it the restaurant effect. And I think you'll know yourself, if you're sitting in a restaurant, you have a kind of a view as to how long it must take to cook that meal. And if your wait time goes longer than that mental model in your head about how long it takes to cook that meal, your anxiety will multiply with each passing minute. And the reason is you're thinking, has the waitress taken my order? Has someone at the back got it? Am I actually in the queue? Do they know I'm here? All those sorts of things. Your anxiety raises. But the great one about this is that it's actually very easy and very possible to very quickly reset your wait clock. So using the restaurant example, if you're in a restaurant and the waitress comes and places the correct cutlery down in front of you for the meal that you've ordered, bam, your anxiety clock has been reset. So you know that they have your order, and just by that very simple activity, it can reset your anxiety clock to 0. The other example I like to give in the real world is the Apple Genius Bar. So for those of you that have been into the Apple Genius Bar and sat down on the couches waiting for your turn, what you'll find is that someone will come to visit you with an iPad every roughly 3 to 4 minutes. And what those people are doing is they're not actually doing anything to cue you faster or make your wait time feel better. What they're actually doing is resetting your wait clock. So the very fact that they come and ask your name and they reassure you that you're in the queue and you're here to see John, and you know John only has 1 or 2 people in front of him, bam, they've reset your wait clock. So the lesson in this, the design lesson for people who have queues, is that if your wait times are going to be over a customer's mental model that they will find acceptable for your service, then you should really think about ways of reducing their anxiety and resetting their wait clock. Okay, so that's sort of 1 to 4. They're the ones that crop up all the time, probably the most important ones. So I'll just briefly go through 5 to 8, and then we'll get onto more into the case studies in terms of how you apply these. So number 5, I guess, unexplained waits are longer than explained waits. Just think about the last time you were in an airport or in a doctor's surgery. If your plane was delayed and the announcement came on and told you that your plane had been delayed, you're more likely to wait with less anxiety because you know that the reason why the plane was delayed. If it's engine trouble, you're happy that they're fixing the engine problem. If it's a doctor and you understand that that doctor has had to go to attend to a medical emergency, you're not going to have anxiety because you're glad that that doctor has gone to do what it is that doctors do best. The other one, 6, so people can't wait to get started. So waiting time stops from the moment that you're occupied. So that's why in restaurants they give you menus. It's also why in doctor's surgery they often give you paperwork to fill in. And interestingly, now with the introduction of self-service checkouts in supermarkets, it's also why self-serve actually feels faster because you're occupied while you're actually doing scanning the job rather than waiting for the person available to scan for you. Number 7, more valuable the more longer you wait. I think that's probably quite evident. You're more likely to wait for a travel itinerary than you would be for a toothbrush to be ordered. And the last one, number 8, about solo waits. It's often better to wait in a line with a friend. The wait time will feel a lot less than if you're standing there by your own. I always like to think about airlines as well with this one, and it's really interesting to watch people's behaviour because they're often travelling solo. And if they find out that that the plane has been delayed, they'll often turn to the person next to them and have a conversation about, oh, phew, you know, now I understand that the plane's been delayed, and they'll start a conversation because they don't want to wait alone. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking through a couple of case studies physical case studies that CEC have done, and also other companies, more to show how these things can be applied in the real world for relatively little cost. So I'm going to talk you through just really briefly a little piece of work that we did for a local council. So just to provide a bit of a backstory, I guess, this council had just refurbished their service centre. They couldn't hire any more staff and they had very limited budget to make changes. So they knew, however, that they had waiting problems and they really wanted to improve the service without much investment. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the layout of the council. We're going to start with the 2 entrance doors. So very typical to a physical queue, there's 2 entrances into the local council at each end. Up on the top left, you'll see that there was a reception area and the service centre, which is where all of the customers queuing happened, was off to the right. So it just looked like that. That's the main entrance area there. You can see the reception in the distance, and then off to the area to the right was the service desk. When you actually walked inside the service desk area, there was 3 main queuing areas. There was one for an engineer, the second one was the main service desk, and the last one was the planner's desk. Interestingly though, there was the only one that was labelled or signposted was the planner's desk. So what we did, we actually added a little bit of a heat map. So we observed how people entered the centre and what they did, and we found some interesting things. So the areas around the desks, I guess, where the little red strips are, was to be expected. But there were a couple of surprises. I think the first surprise is on the left there at the reception area, the large red area around the reception. this was a major reason for causing frustration. So customers were walking in and they were queuing at the reception desk only to be told that they needed to go inside to enter the area to be served. So really what was happening is they were queuing twice. The light blue area was also quite interesting from our perspective. These were where their seats were located, and you can see that the light blue basically means that those seats were virtually never used. So also it shows that the rest of the centre is not really being that well utilised. So because people were standing waiting in the queues. So this is sort of good from a theoretical point of view, but I just wanted to give you the story of a customer who might have used this service centre. So I'm going to give you the real story of Joe. So Joe walked into the council street entrance, which is the one on the far end, and he made his way to the planner's desk believing that it was for building inquiries. So the planning desk told Joe that his inquiry wasn't relevant to them and he needed to go to the main service desk, which is number 2 in this diagram. So Joe walked down the stairs, he waits in line for 10 minutes. When he finally speaks to the service assistant, she informs Joe that he needs to go to the engineer's desk, which is number 3 on the diagram. So Joe walks to the engineer's desk. After repeating his question for the 3rd time, the building surveyor at the engineer's desk tells him he's unsure about the question. He should wait while he goes to speak to a team at the planning desk. So the building surveyor returns 10 minutes later. He tells Joe, no, your inquiry needs to be answered by the planning desk. They should be able to help you out. So Joe walks back to the planning desk. He's told by the planner that his inquiry can be answered, but the right person to speak to is actually away that day. So they took his details very politely and told him that he would be contacted. It seems absurd, but it's really very typical of what a lot of places put you through when they put you through multiple waiting experiences. But I like to say that they really had the psychological waiting quinella. So people had nothing to do. They were queuing for longer than 10 minutes without being able to occupy their time. They had no concept of first in, first served. So people were wondering if they should jump the queue and get an answer to their question. And then they had no idea of how long it would take to get through it, or even if they were standing in the right queue. So this is it, the psychological waiting quinella. So we actually asked the team in the reception area, we gave them the psychology of waiting and asked them how they would go about making that wait time better. What they did is they went ahead with moving the engineer closer to the planner's desk, so they effectively reduced the 3 queues down to 2 queues. They added signs to each of the different service desks, telling people what the functions were that desk performed. And they added a water cooler, they raised the blinds, and they also moved the desks to make it easier for customers to be able to see the plans. So in essence, they were making the opportunity to wait just that little bit more pleasant. So the total estimated cost of these solutions were under $5,000, and most of them were implemented within 1 or 2 weeks of actually coming up with the right idea. So finally, I mean, this particular local council was also going to pursue an idea of a system similar to the NEXA system that we put in place for Service New South Wales. So you can see that when you put in place systems like technology systems that allow people to see their ticket number and where they are in the queue and calling people to desks to be served, it essentially frees up the rest of your waiting area and allows people to take a seat rather than standing. And it also helps reduce anxiety because they know exactly where they are in the queue, and the physical ticket that they're holding in their hand means that they know that they're going to be seen. So what's interesting, I guess, is that these psychological factors of waiting don't just apply to physical queues, they also apply to online. And I'll just give you an example of that. Now, we didn't design Uber's waiting app, but I think it is really a great example of how you can go about applying the psychology of waiting in a digital environment. So what I've done here, I've just taken a really quick screenshot of an Uber trip that I made recently. And it's just worth having a look at the screen and just seeing what you can see. So this is just the first screen, but you can see that what they've done is really designed an app that's very good at giving you a clear and finite wait. So the little 2-minute dot on the left-hand side tells you exactly how long you have to wait. If you think back to the old taxi days, and you could be standing on a street corner with this massive level of anxiety thinking, I wonder if a taxi's going to be nearby. The other thing that Uber really allows you to do is it massively reduces your anxiety, as it allows you to see the car that you've ordered and how long it's going to take to get to you, as well as the driver and the type of car and the car's number plate, and also a ranking of how that driver has been ranked from other customers. So all of those things are going to inform you and make you feel more comfortable that you've made the right decision to wait for that person to come to get you. So we just talk, this is really, the two things that Uber's done here, number 3 and number 4, uncertain waits, reduce the uncertain wait, and really gone about reducing your anxiety. So I'm also going to ask you to think about the last time that you waited on a phone. Normally now I'd play you a piece of hold music, which is probably going to drive you into some sort of a psychotic episode. Most people absolutely hate hold music, and I think the point that I'm going to make really is that most companies use hold music as an attempt to keep you occupied, but unless it's really relevant to the reason for your call, it's most often seen as a frustration and irritating. And there's quite a lot of studies, psychological studies, that show that waiting on a telephone can actually make you physically sick. So what happens in telephone examples is you often break 2 main rules. These ones here, number 1 and number 3. So unoccupied time is always feeling long, and then you're never really certain about how long it is until someone's going to pick up the telephone. So this telephony experience, I guess, has led to the introduction of quite a lot of new telephony technology. I'll just briefly cover some of it, but there's now callback technology that allows you to do things other than hold on the phone. So you can actually say, yes, I'd like to be placed in the queue, and have somebody phone you back. A lot of companies are also looking at adding relevant messaging to the time of the year that you're on the phone. So as an example, if it's tax time, you can tell people that their tax statements are about to be mailed to them on a certain date. Or it could be messaging that's relevant to the company. So there's a great case study of a sports marketing company that used to play commentary highlights of the game until they found out that some people actually were asking to be transferred back into the queue so they could hear the final score. It's also the reason for the introduction of wait time announcements in telephony. So quite often now when you're waiting on the phone, they'll actually tell you, we're experiencing high demand now, the wait time will be about 6 or 7 minutes. So all of those pieces of technology have been used to kind of try and reduce your anxiety. So I guess a little bit in summary, it's over to you to use the 8 factors of waiting to really help you design or redesign your waiting experiences physically, online, and on the telephone. I know that applying these factors has helped me in many ways. Really, the 3 main ways, the first one is that it's really helped me to frame my design problem. So I often think now, is the actual problem the wait time, or really is it what's happening during the wait time that I need to solve? The second one is that it actually helps, and we now use these in a lot of workshops with clients to kind of get them to generate ideas that will help improve the waiting experiences for their physical phone and online channels. And then the last one for me, obviously, is it's really helped to understand my husband more and what's going on in his head when I put him through these waiting experiences.
Wow, Freya, so many rich insights into your presentation, and many of those insights we can start implementing in our own organisations today. Thank you very much. As you mentioned in your presentation, NEXA worked closely with the customer experience company on the Service New South Wales overhaul, and together we helped them reduce wait times and manage their queues so much better, and this has had such a positive outcome for that organisation. We've had a few questions from the audience, and we thank you for that very much, and we'll spend the next couple of minutes answering those. If you have any further questions, simply drop them into the questions panel on your control centre, and we'll attend to them as soon as possible. If we run out of time, it's okay. We will include the answers in the email with this recording that we'll send through to you. So the first question we've had is from Dave. Do appointment systems solve queuing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question we get asked all the time. So appointment systems by themselves are actually not a great queue management tool, only because they suffer from a couple of problems. So the first problem is the one that everyone would know about, which is customers don't show up for their appointments and you end up with dead time. The other really tricky problem is that it's often difficult to decide how far apart to schedule appointments. So if they're too close together, the appointments, you'll end up running behind. And if they're too far apart, you'll end up with wasted idle time, which leads to inefficiency. So appointment systems often also fail or amplified by this concept of failure to deliver, which is this concept where you'll wait patiently until your appointment time, but then the minute that appointment time passes, the wait time becomes exponentially more annoying. So what we always suggest to people is that if you're going to deploy, it's really to deploy smart appointment technology. So it's not just about having the appointment, but also the business process that goes behind that appointment. So often things like customer communication tools, like proactive bi-directional SMS reminders. So I think in the example that I used earlier, having an SMS to tell people that their appointment is due in about 15 minutes can help. And also if people are running late, if an appointment is running late, you can go out to customers and actually tell them that it's running late. And also other strategic planning tools. So it really becomes, when working in an appointment-based system, it becomes really important to constantly ensure that you have the right staffing levels and also ensure that you have the right staff with the right level of knowledge to answer the questions that are required by that appointment. So it's all about optimizing optimizing the workforce that you have to manage those appointments.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question from Donna. So why don't you just put TVs up in all the wedding rooms to occupy people?
Yeah, Donna, that's a great question. And to be honest, TVs work to a certain extent because they're very successful at occupying people's time. But they're a little bit like hold music in that they only work for a little while, and then people will still become very conscious of the time that they spent waiting. So we often find that the distractions work. However, the best way to occupy people's time is giving them an activity that is connected to why they are queuing. So if you think about a restaurant and a themed restaurant, you can often find that people, that the thing that occupies them is something to do with the connected theme. Or, if Disney is a great example of this, so while you're waiting in the Disney queue, they send out the Disney animated people to occupy you while you're waiting. So when you think about occupying, don't just think about anything. Think about something that is relevant to the service or the reason why you're queuing.
Thank you for that. We've had another online question from Christy. Are there any research papers you would recommend for further reading?
Yes, I would recommend reading David Maister's paper. We can provide a link to it at the end of the webinar, but I think that's probably one of the best pieces of research. Also, generally online you can find quite a bit of information about ideas and case studies that people have come up with to occupy waiting time that's relevant to the reason that they're waiting. So to my last point, some companies have come up with some really great ideas to help reduce the time.
Good. I think we've got 2 more questions in. One is to ticket or not to ticket. That is the question.
That is the question. So our advice is always, you can use both really. So numbers are often better to let you know where you are in relation to others. So, Bill, it's important to me to know if I'm, ahead of you or behind you. But we've also found with places like government, like Service New South Wales, there can often be some privacy issues with using customers' names. So in summary, I guess the answer is it really depends on if privacy and security is a concern. So if you're in government or health, there could be really compelling reasons to retain a customer's name and keep it private. So think about, in that instance, using a number-related system. If you think about hospitality, like a barista, a numbering system would not be appropriate. So the use of people's names to collect your coffee has become commonplace.
Good. One more question, I think there. What is virtual queuing I've heard of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a virtual queue is really just a waiting line without a physical line. So customers typically register for their turn to be served through some form of technology. So in my presentation, I showed you a picture of a coffee smartphone app, or they could be using a self-service kiosk, or if you think of the Apple experience, it could be a concierge armed with a tablet device. So they basically registered using one of those pieces of technology, but then the most important thing is that they can wait for that service doing whatever they please. So instead of having to occupy them with things like TV or other things, they can go off and do whatever it is that they want. So if you think of a doctor's surgery, if it's co-located next to a shopping centre, they can go off and do their shopping, or they can pick up a prescription or whatever it is that they need to do. And then, so it really links back to the first rule, I guess, which is the virtual queuing systems are really good at linking back to the occupied time. So customers' frustration reduced because instead of being stuck in an actual physical queue, then they're out doing what it is that they want to be doing. And we've found on numerous occasions that these types of things really reduce customers' perceived waiting time, which is a really relevant point because, in fact, the actual wait time hasn't reduced, but the perception of wait time has. And it's really the perception of wait time that drives a Net Promoter Score or a customer satisfaction score, not the actual wait time.
Interesting question. Just the last minute that's just come in. How can you explain the personality factor? Purchasing a coffee and having the barista know your name is great because it's a regular habitual task, versus visiting the service centre for a license renewal is irregular. Can you apply the personality factor to irregular queues?
So I think, they're 2 slightly different things, I think. So what you're really trying to do, the problem that we're really trying to solve is reducing people's anxiety because they don't know how long it is until they're seen. So that's why ticketed numbering systems are often good, because they give you a piece of paper with a number on it, tells you where you are in relation to the person sitting next to you. However, if you were to give somebody a piece of paper with their name on it, that would work equally as well in terms of knowing that they're registered to be seen and reducing anxiety in that instance. But I think it really depends on the service. So if you're the vision for your organisation or your company is kind of driven by a really personalised service where you are expected to know your customers, then often a name can be more aligned to what your company is trying to achieve. But then also you might want to consider doing both. So say, for instance, in a doctor's surgery, we did an experiment recently, and we found that the number was really useful for calling out because it reduces the complexity of all of the different names and pronunciations of names that happen in a doctor's surgery. But then once the patient and doctor have introduced themselves, then using the patient's name was by far the better experience in that instance. So you can use both at the same time.
Okay, I think that's just over 40 minutes. So it's been a fascinating 40 minutes, and we hope you found the presentation as insightful as we did. I'd like to thank Freya very much for her time to provide us these interesting pieces of the presentation. The contact details for Freya and I are up on the screen now, and should you like to follow up on anything we've discussed and presented today, please be in touch with us. We'd like to thank you for your time. We look forward to growing a culture of customer centricity in organisations across Australia.
We do.